All right, happy Sunday. Hope everybody's having a good weekend. I am back with yet another 2025 game-by-game prediction for you. And up today, the Corn Dogs. Stuff. Yeah, good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. That's right. It is me, Lustradamus, live on YouTube for you. Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. On the road to 75,000 subscribers. Trying to get there by the end of the year, so help me out. Make sure you're subbed up to the channel. Hit the thumbs up. Leave a comment. That helps with the algorithm. And share the video out somewhere on your social media, your Facebook, Twitter, whatever you have. Let's help get Uncle Lou to 75K. By the end of the year. All right, we are going to talk about the LSU Tigers today. As you can see, I've got the schedule pulled up over here. We're going to go through it game by game. I'll give you a winner and a loser for every single week. Before we get to that, we'll recap 24, talk about roster changes. That we'll put the schedule up on the screen. We'll go through it, and I am going to give you a winner for every single game this year for the LSU Tigers. Real quick before we get to that, I guess I wore an LA hat or a Los Angeles hat in a video a week or so ago. And somebody was kind enough in the comment sections to let me know that I needed to take that hat off because LA is woke. Now, just in case I wasn't completely sure at that point that he was mentally retarded, he went ahead and removed all doubt by go ahead and telling me that instead of the LA hat, I should get an Atlanta hat. Look here, bud. I'm not sure when the last time was you left your zip code. But Atlanta's pretty fucking woke. But anyway, here you go, bud. An Atlanta hat. So I hope you enjoy this video. All right, let's talk about LSU. Let's start with Brian Kelly. I get asked a lot if I think Brian Kelly's on the hot seat or could be fired from LSU if they don't make the playoffs or something this year. Short answer to that question is no. Now, I could make a whole video on getting into why that is or isn't. He's only been there 3 years and hasn't had any disastrous years. I mean, he went 9-3 each of his first 2 years. I'm talking regular season. Little step back last year to 8-4. He's 3-0 in the postseason. He's won all 3 of his postseason games. Now, they were sort of mid to lower level bowl games. He won a Citrus Bowl, a ReliaQuest Bowl, and a Texas Bowl. He lost the biggest game he's played at LSU. If you remember back in his first season, LSU made the SEC championship game. That was Jaden Daniels' first year as quarterback at LSU. He went on to win the Heisman the next year. But his first year, which was also Brian Kelly's first year there at LSU, they made the SEC championship game and just got absolutely destroyed. They were losing by, I think, 4 touchdowns at halftime in that game. Jaden Daniels got hurt. Nussmeier, the current quarterback, actually came in and played the second half of that game. So that's the biggest game that Brian Kelly has coached in or made it to so far in his 3 years at LSU. So I get it that maybe that's a little disappointing. No playoff appearances, no SEC championships, no double-digit regular season win totals. Now he won 10 games each of his first 2 years, but again, it was 9-3 in the regular season, got to 10 with the wins in the bowl game. But again, he hasn't had the disastrous season. You know, he hasn't had really, I mean, I guess he's had a couple of what you might consider to be bad losses, but nothing that I think should warrant really any type of talk of him being fired. The other thing is, you got to remember, these schools are having to pay $21 million a year now to the athletes. That's $20 or $21 million a year that they don't have to pay towards coaching buyouts. So I know over the last 15 to 20 years or so, college football in terms of head coaches has turned into sort of like this 3, maybe 4 year window where if you don't win in 3 or 4 years, we're going to pay you a buyout and move on. I think that window is going to get extended some now that these schools are having to dish out money to the players. I think you're going to see some coaches that maybe get a little bit more rope, an extra year or two versus kind of what we're used to seeing. I think we might need to adjust our mindset to more of like a 4 or 5 or a 6-year window, as opposed to sort of the 3 or 4-year window where a lot of coaches were getting fired. And again, besides that, I really don't think Brian Kelly deserves to be fired. Now we're in a 12-team playoff now, and that's going to change sort of how coaches are viewed at certain places across the board in college football. LSU is a school that I don't think is going to accept, 4 or 5, 6 years in a row of not even being able to make a 12-team playoff, right? So that's the goal for LSU, really, in any given year. You got to remember, LSU has won a national championship with each of their last 3 coaches. That may have happened some other time in college football, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. A school that has won national titles with 3 consecutive coaches. Saban won one. He left. They got Les Miles. Les Miles won a natty. Les Miles left. They brought in Ed Orgeron. Ed Orgeron won a natty. And Ed Orgeron's a pretty average, would be kind, I think, to describe Ed Orgeron as a coach. I do not think Ed Orgeron's some kind of great coach. And obviously LSU agrees. They fired him 2 years after he won his national title. That was sort of a lightning in the bottle year there for Ed Orgeron, the Joe Burrow year. He had 2 really great coordinators and sort of he was the first one to sort of popularize, is that right? The idea of having like a separate passing game coordinator. Anyway, we don't need to get into all that. So the bottom line for me is this. I think Brian Kelly is a top 10 head coach in all of college football now. He was at Notre Dame for a long time. And just like at LSU when he lost that SEC championship game, the biggest game he's played in, that was the knock at Notre Dame. He had a lot of really good regular seasons, 9, 10-win seasons, right? But he lost every major postseason game he played at Notre Dame, every one. He made a BCS national title game way back in 2012, lost. Made a bunch of New Year's Six games, lost. Made the playoffs twice at Notre Dame, lost in the first round. In 2020, Notre Dame was actually in the ACC fully, the COVID year. And Notre Dame made the ACC championship game, lost. He then comes to LSU, makes the SEC championship game in his first year, loses. So that's sort of the knock on Brian Kelly. He had one really bad regular season at Notre Dame, but outside of that 1 year, he's consistently been a 9, 10-win coach. He's a lot like Mark Richt at Georgia. Now, Mark Richt had a couple of conference titles early in his career. Brian Kelly doesn't have that, but he's in that sort of no man's land where he's not having such a bad season where it's sort of easy to come to the conclusion that you want to fire him and move on. He's winning 9, 10 games a year, but he's not taking that next step. Now, this might be the year that happens. A lot of LSU fans, of course, are counting on that, and we'll see if that happens. Again, I'm going to go through the schedule in a second. They went all in the portal. I mean, all in. They had the number 1 ranked portal class in the country. Let me see. Do I have this pulled up here? Yeah. They signed 18 players out of the portal. 12 4-stars, 5 3-star rankings there in the portal for a total of 18 players. Texas Tech was second in the portal. So there's some glaring weaknesses or depth issues on LSU coming out of last season. And they have clearly tried to address that through the portal, signing, like I mentioned, 18 players out of the portal. We're going to talk about the offense and defense in a second. They're going to have portal players playing in almost every single position group on the field outside of quarterback. And I guess maybe running back. They've got a couple of really good young running backs that they've recruited themselves. But they've got new wide receivers. They've got new offensive linemen, wide receivers through the portal, O-line through the portal, edge rushers through the portal, 2 new corners through the portal. It's going to be night and day difference in terms of the starters that line up for LSU this season versus last season. Now, will that work? Well, it hasn't worked yet in the age of the portal. If you look at every single class that has had the number 1 portal class in each year since the portal became a thing, since it's been tracked, so you can go back 3 years from now, you're talking about Southern Cal, who did not win the Pac-12 that year and did not make the playoffs that year. They had the number 1 portal class. Colorado, in Deion's first year, had the number 1 portal class. They were terrible. They were a 3 or a 4 win team coming out of that number 1 ranked portal class. And Ole Miss. who went 9-3 last year after having the number one portal class, didn't play for the SEC championship game and didn't make the playoffs. Florida State last year is another kind of example of this, a team that sort of completely revamped its roster in the offseason for reasons unknown. And obviously that didn't work at 2-10. Now, there's been a lot of high-level teams who have sort of plugged holes in the portal here and there and done really well. Ohio State last year, the majority of Ohio State's team was sort of homegrown. In other words, it was players they recruited and signed out of high school themselves, but they had three just key portal additions that really helped them last year. That quarterback, obviously, Will Howard. They had Quinshon Judkins, the running back, and, of course, Caleb Downs, the safety. We've yet to see this approach that Brian Kelly and LSU have taken this offseason. We've yet to see that work in terms of making the postseason in that year. That's the goal for LSU. We'll see if they're able to. Accomplish that. If you remember last year, they started out with a loss to Southern Cal, which looked worse and worse as the season went along because Southern Cal just was not very good. They were a mid-level Big Ten team. They were hovering around 500. Struggled to make a bowl. They had to beat UCLA, I think, at the end of the season just to make a bowl game. So that loss looked worse and worse as the season went along. And of course, LSU has not won a week one game since 2019. That's 5 years in a row they've lost their opening game, going all the way back to the COVID year in 2020 with Ed Orgeron. And Brian Kelly has lost all three of his week one games. So that'll be a trend they look to turn around. But, I mean, it might not be easy when you see Clemson up there. And again, we're going to get to that in a second. They then reeled off a bunch of wins in a row before losing on the road at Texas A&M, getting blown out by Alabama, and losing on the road at Florida in 3 consecutive weeks at the end of the year. Not a good end of the season at all for LSU. They lost to Texas A&M by double digits. It wasn't even close, 38-23, completely destroyed by Alabama, 42-13. And really not that competitive on the road at Florida, where they lost 27-16, again, to a team that's wasn't great. So I mentioned earlier they haven't had like any bad or embarrassing losses. These are borderline bad losses here. When you're losing to last year's Southern Cal team, last year's Florida team, these are not good. Now, the Florida game was a road game, so maybe you chalk it up to that, but the Southern Cal thing was neutral site. So it wasn't great last year. And again, they recognized that. They recognized the weaknesses combined with what they lost to the draft and graduation, and they've gone all in the portal. We'll see if it works. Let's take a look at the type of team they're looking to field this season in 2025. Now, it starts with the quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier, and whatever weaknesses or question marks you might have about LSU from the head coach down, Nussmeier should not be one of them. He's one of the best returning quarterbacks in all of college football. Now, he's got a little bit of a turnover problem that he needs to address. You got to cut down on those turnovers. That is going to end up costing you if you make it to any type of postseason. You can't have that type of turnover rate and be successful against the high-end elite teams. So that's something that Nussmeier will look to improve on. But he is the second or third best returning quarterback probably in all of college football. I mean, you're talking Cade Klubnik at Clemson. But again, shout out to this week one game up here. It's going to be amazing, LSU and Clemson. He's one of the front runners in terms of the Heisman. If you look at the odds, he's in the top 3 or 4 odds to win the Heisman. So he's a bright spot, a potential breakout season. Well, I would argue last year was a breakout season for him outside of a turnover deal. But anyway, so he's really good. So you start there, and you've got a good foundation to work with offensively for this season if you're LSU. Now, the running back position, again, I like 2 of their running backs in particular. The one they had last year, he played as a true freshman, pretty good year. I think he had 700 or 800 yards. He's back as a sophomore, and they bring in the number 1 rated high school recruit in the country from last year's recruiting class. So a pretty good 1-2 combination there. Now, the guy that's a true freshman, you kind of want to see him do it before you're fully comfortable maybe with what he can add to the offense, but the talent is there. But they were terrible when it came to running the ball last year. One of the worst years running the ball that LSU's had in a long time. They only averaged about 110 rushing yards per game. Now, again, you look at Nussmeier's numbers last year, and they were really good. Part of that is because they were forced to throw the ball so much because they just could not run the ball. They did not have a good running game overall last year. Again, I liked the freshman. He had a good year. But overall, as a team, you're rushing for 110 yards a game. That's just not going to cut it, especially in the SEC. So that's something they'll be looking to improve on this season. Offensive line, maybe that's an area that can help them improve in the run game. Well, kind of a mixed bag here at offensive line. Now, they lose both of their tackles from last year's team. They bring in some players from the portal. They're moving players around from center to guard or guard to tackle. It's going to be sort of a remade offensive line for LSU. I would put that in sort of the to be determined category. No reason to expect it to be terrible, but we don't know exactly, hard to know how good it will be because it's just a lot of new there on the offensive line. When it comes to wide receivers, again, you're looking at some serious question marks here at the wide receiver position. They lose 4 of their top 5 pass catchers from last season. Aaron Anderson is the one who returns. He had 61 catches last year for 884 yards. 61 catches was the most on the team, by the way. So you get a good one back, but the rest of them are going to be new. And again, familiar theme here. They go into the portal. They bring in a wide receiver from Kentucky, Barian Brown. They bring in a wide receiver from Oklahoma, Nick Anderson. And those are probably going to be 2 of the starting wide receivers, or at least in the rotation. Teams will rotate 3 to 4 wide receivers. Basically, it's kind of like trying to figure out who's running back one. A lot of teams kind of split carries between a couple of running backs. Wide receivers tend to be the same way. You got 3 or 4 wide receivers that kind of rotate in or out. Those 2 transfers are going to be part of that 3 or 4 wide receiver rotation for LSU, I'm sure, which is a little unusual that LSU would have to go into the portal to get starting wide receivers, because LSU over the last 10 or 15 years has kind of become like wide receiver U of the South. I mean, Ohio State owns the title of wide receiver U. There's no doubt about it. But LSU has had no shortage of elite, sort of high-end, top talent wide receivers. I mean, just look at the NFL draft. That held the year they won the national title with Jamar Chase and was it Justin Jefferson? I mean, they just had unbelievable wide receivers. So it's a little surprising to me they had to go to the portal to get 2 starters. But again, transfer portal, kind of the theme for LSU this offseason. So that's them offensively. Some returning talent, quarterback. I like the young running back from last year. He'll be a second-year guy this year, replacing about half the offensive line. New wide receivers. We'll see how it all comes together. Now, over on the defensive side of the ball, I think I have less questions over there. Now, again, they went heavy in the portal, but they got some guys that I think are going to be pretty good. Patrick Payton from Florida State. Now, he was kind of forgotten about last year because Florida State was just so bad, but I think he's pretty good. He's an edge rusher. They bring him in. Harold Perkins Jr., of course, is back. Now, he was one of the best defensive players on the planet a few years ago. A position change and some injuries have sort of moved him to the back burner in terms of the conversation around the best defensive players in football over the last year or so. He's healthy. He's back. He could have a really, really good season. I was kind of surprised he didn't go to the NFL, but again, he had injuries last year, so decided to come back. He's going to play. He's played on the outside some. He's played in the middle. They've moved him around. It looks like he's going to play more in the middle this year, kind of that hybrid like linebacker safety type position. So again, we'll see how he does, but undeniable talent and potential for Harold Perkins Jr. Could be one of the breakout players of the year. Again, he was really, really good a couple of years ago, so it wouldn't be a surprise if he was good again. But because of the injuries and things, he's kind of been forgotten a little bit. But I think he's really, really good. They get back Jacoby and Guillory, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. He'll be in the middle. I think he was their leading tackler last year, too. The edge rushers I already talked about. They bring in Jack Pyburn from Florida and Patrick Payton from Florida State. Patrick Payton in particular, I think, could be really, really good. Whit Weeks is back. No, he was their leading tackler, Whit Weeks. He's back, a linebacker, Whit Weeks. He's their leading tackler from last year, 125 tackles last year. He's back. And then you move over to the secondary, and they bring in 2 corners out of the portal that are probably both going to play. Oh, I'm sorry, 1 corner out of the portal. Another is a freshman that is probably going to have to play. Virginia Tech transfer Mansour Delane, and a freshman DJ Pickett. He's 6'4". He was a 5-star corner. Everybody wanted him. Again, corner, one of these positions where LSU seems to get an elite guy or two almost every single year. Corner and wide receiver, typically really good recruiting wise for LSU. So that's what the roster looks like heading into 2025. Again, very heavy in the portal. You're going to see a lot of new faces on this roster. And the question is going to be the same question you have about any team every single year that is this heavy in the portal. The talent is there, but how do they play together as a team? Is it going to be a we approach or a me approach with some of these portal players? We've seen it kind of go both ways. You look at Florida State last year, once they lost a few games, it appeared to most people like a lot of players on that team just gave up, just quit trying, lost interest. Again, these weren't lifelong Florida State guys. A lot of them were mercenaries that were coming in for 1 or 2 years. And when you do that, that's the risk you run. Again, Colorado has done this. It didn't work. Ole Miss has struck gold in the portal. They've just yet to get over the hump with it. They're probably the closest team in terms of going all into the portal in a particular offseason to actually making the playoffs. Last year, they were 9-3, very close to making the playoffs. That loss to Florida for Ole Miss at the end of the year really hurt them. But that's probably the best example of a team that has done what LSU is trying to do this year that has worked. It's last year's Ole Miss team. Again, it got them to 9-3. Now, 9-3 for LSU is not going to make the fans happy. They obviously would want to do at least a game better than that. 10-2, at least last year, was kind of the cutoff point for making the playoffs. I do think it's very possible for some 9-3 teams to make the playoffs, but it's going to depend on what the records are in sort of the second tier teams in all the other conferences, right? How many 9-3 teams are in the Big Ten, the ACC, the Big 12 versus 10-2 or 11-1 teams, and which ones they put in. But obviously LSU's goals are way beyond 9-3. They look to compete to win the SEC and make the playoffs this year. We'll see if that's able to happen. Let's take a look at the odds. What does the betting market say about LSU? Now, this doesn't necessarily mean this is how the season will play out. This is just a pretty good indicator right now, about 5 weeks before the season starts, of what the general public feels about a particular team, in this case, LSU. So when you look at the win total, the expected win total for LSU this year is 8.5. That's out of 12 games. This doesn't take postseason into account. So this is, okay, here's their 12-game schedule. How many of these games can they win? The over-under is 8.5. You can't win 8.5 games. We all know that. That's a betting number. So if you're really high on LSU, you go, I think they're winning more than 8.5 games. I'm going to bet over 8.5 wins, 9-3, 10-2, 11-1. If you say, I don't think this portal thing's going to work, Nussmeier's not going to be able to get his interceptions cleaned up, whatever the case, I think they're going to be worse than 8.5, then you'd bet under 8.5, thinking they're going to go 8-4, 7-5, whatever the case. But the expected win total for LSU does sit at 8.5. As far as winning the SEC, what are LSU's chances to win the conference this year? Again, according to the betting markets, well, Texas is your favorite, followed very closely by Georgia. Then there's a little bit of a drop-off. You get to Alabama. A little bit of another drop off, and then you get to LSU. So LSU right now with the 4th best odds of winning the SEC in 2025. And what about winning it all? Well, LSU sits around 9th or 10th in the odds, depending on where you look. The favorites in order: Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, Penn State, Alabama, Oregon, Clemson, Notre Dame, and then LSU. Again, this is national title odds. So they're in the top 10 in terms of odds to win the national title. A lot of talent on this roster. Brian Kelly's won a lot of games over the course of his career. Again, he's been coaching for 15 or 16 years now and is averaging almost 10 wins a year in the Power Four over those 15 or 16 years. So whatever you think about Brian Kelly, maybe his inability to win the big game or choking in certain spots or whatever the case, he has consistently been one of the best coaches in football for the last 15 or 16 years, at least in terms of record. 12 or 13 years at Notre Dame, whatever it was, now 3-4 years at LSU. It's a long time to be in the Power Four, and he's averaging about 10 wins a year. So he's not a terrible coach. He doesn't suck, or whatever kind of things you might hear some people say about him. I don't think that's true. I think he's a pretty good coach. Not very many coaches in the history of college football have averaged 10 wins a year over a 14 or a 15-year period. Brian Kelly has. Now, again, I'll be the first to admit it's sort of a James Franklin situation here. It's almost gotten to the point where Brian Kelly, where it doesn't really matter what he does in the regular season. People need to see him win a quote-unquote big game. And he really hasn't been able to do that. Now, he's got some big regular season wins, but again, we recapped it earlier. In terms of postseason, whether it's conference championship games, New Year's Six games, BCS games, or playoff games, he's winless all time in all of those matchups both at Notre Dame and LSU. So that's sort of the hurdle that Brian Kelly as a coach is trying to get over. All right, let's go through the schedule game by game. I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. All right, my sort of overall opinion about LSU and this schedule before I sat down and looked into all this today. What did I kind of think about LSU? I don't really like the all in the portal approach, generally speaking. Now, Colorado's defense from a few years ago, they didn't have much of a choice. It was a terrible roster. A lot of the roster left when Deion got hired. So he was sort of forced to do that his first year, and it obviously didn't work. Now he's continued that approach there, and it still hasn't worked. They won 8 or 9 games last year or whatever. It hasn't made it to or won anything significant there. Southern Cal tried this approach in Lincoln Riley's first year there, where he brought a lot of players with him from Oklahoma and brought other players in from around the country, the #1 portal class that year. Didn't win the conference, didn't make the playoffs, lost to a group of 5 team in the postseason. Ole Miss last year, all in the portal, #1 portal class, loses to a terrible, a 3-win Kentucky team and a terrible Florida team at the end of the year and misses the playoffs at 9-3. A good season for Ole Miss standards, 9-3 historically. But again, the all-in approach to the portal hasn't seemed to work to the degree that these teams want it to work when they try it. Florida State last year, 2-10. So in general, I would prefer, top 10 recruiting classes year in and year out, and then using the portal to fill in holes on a year-to-year basis, the same way the NFL uses free agency. You had a year where your wide receivers were really bad. Okay, go get a wide receiver or 2 from the portal. You lose all of your offensive linemen to the draft or the NFL, so you got a bunch of young, unproven kids on your roster. Okay, maybe you go out and get a veteran center, a veteran tackle, whatever the case, quarterback, filling holes and needs. This thing where you go out and you sign 20, 30 plus portal players in a year, I'm not a big fan of that. And as good of a coach as I think Brian Kelly is, I have serious doubts about Brian Kelly when it comes to winning big games. And you're going to see in a second when we go through this schedule, I think that might come back to bite Brian Kelly and LSU this season when we look at a couple of their games towards the end of the year. That was sort of my thoughts about LSU going into this video. Let's go through the schedule. I'll give you a winner and a loser here for all of these games. Now, we're getting to the point where these prediction videos, I've done about 20 of them now. We're getting to the point where when I do a prediction video, a lot of these teams, how do I point over there? There we go. A lot of these teams on this schedule right here, I've already done a prediction video for. So if you've watched those prediction videos, you know which way I'm going on some of these games. The Clemson game is one of them. I've done Clemson, I've done Alabama, and I've done Oklahoma in particular. So I've done those 3 prediction videos already. So if I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the Clemson, Bama, and Oklahoma games. If you want to know more of my thoughts on those games in particular, click back and watch the Clemson prediction video I did, the Alabama prediction video I did, or the Oklahoma prediction video I did. But we'll start with Clemson. It's the first game. It's on the road. 2 streaks going here. Clemson has lost 3 straight games to the SEC all last year. They lost to Georgia at the beginning of the year. They lost to South Carolina at the end of the year, and they lost to Texas in the playoffs. So 3 straight losses to the SEC for Dabo Swinney and Clemson. 5 straight week 1 losses for LSU, which predates even Brian Kelly. Ed Orgeron lost in 20 and 21. Brian Kelly has lost in 22, 23, and 24. So 5 straight week 1 losses for LSU, 3 straight SEC losses for Clemson. One of these streaks is going to have to get broken. I am extremely excited to watch this game. I think this might be the most entertaining game of week 1. Even more so than Texas and Ohio State. With Texas and Ohio State, I like defensive low-scoring games, and that's what I'm expecting from Texas and Ohio State. But this game here, unlike the Texas and Ohio State matchup, which feature 2 first-year starting quarterbacks, this game features 2 of the best quarterbacks in all of college football, at least returning quarterbacks. Ton of experience for both Nussmeier and Klubnik, the quarterback over at Clemson. Both of these teams have been sort of invisible from the postseason. Clemson did make it last year by a miracle, by the way. I mean, they lost 3 games and still got in because they won the ACC, but they weren't a great team last year. These teams were dominant in sort of the late 20 teens and have both taken a little bit of a step back over the last 3 or 4 years. One of these streaks is going to have to get broken. I think this is going to be a great game. I think it's going to be close. I think it comes down to the fourth quarter. I think maybe which quarterback makes a mistake, or more importantly, which quarterback doesn't make a mistake, could have a lot to do with who wins this game. That and the fact that it's at Clemson, I think, is a massive advantage for Clemson. Number one, they have a huge home field advantage themselves. Number two, LSU has one of the biggest home field advantages in all of college football. So by not having to play at Clemson, or at LSU, that's an advantage for Clemson in and of itself. Never mind the fact they also have a great home field advantage themselves. I'm taking Clemson in this game. You know that already if you watched my Clemson prediction video. On this one, it literally came down to home field for me. What's the real Death Valley, by the way? Is it LSU or is it Clemson? You can let me know in the comments down below. If this game was at LSU, I would most likely pick LSU to win the game, but it's not. It's on the road. It's at Clemson. Unfortunately for the LSU, man, I think their streak of week 1 losses continues. I've got LSU starting the season 0-1. That's the bad news. Good news is that's a non-conference game. That's not an SEC game, and because of automatic qualifiers now, LSU can still guarantee themselves a spot in the playoffs by just winning the SEC. Besides that, this would be considered a quality loss. I mean, you don't ever want to lose, but this isn't like Alabama last year losing to Vandy or a terrible Oklahoma team. This would be a loss to a really good team on the road at their home stadium. So not an embarrassing loss, but I do have LSU losing. They'll rebound the next week against lower classification in-state school Louisiana Tech, and then a massive game here for both teams, LSU and Florida. Florida beat LSU last year. One of the biggest upsets or surprises in all of college football. Florida was terrible, and then at the end of the year, they had 2 wins that you just didn't see coming at all, LSU and Ole Miss. That was in the swamp. This game is at home. If LSU does lose on the road at Clemson, this game against Florida becomes almost a must-win game. Not because it would mathematically eliminate them from anything down the road, but the perception around LSU, the media coverage, the talking points, if LSU were to start the season 1-2 with losses to Clemson and Florida, and the Florida loss would be at home if they lost, the pressure on Brian Kelly, I think, would be immense, and he doesn't handle pressure well. We've just seen that from his major postseason game record, which is winless all time. With that being said, I don't think LSU loses this game at home. This is a must-win game here, I think, for LSU. I think Florida drops that one on the road. LSU gets a huge win for confidence and sort of perception purposes. They're 2-1. Then they play the Southeastern Louisiana Lions. That will obviously be another win. I've got LSU at 3-1 before they travel on the road to take on Ole Miss. This is a tricky game, and this is a game I think LSU could lose. Ole Miss lost a lot off of last year's team. They're heavy in the portal again. New quarterback. They lost some of their best defensive pieces from last year that were sort of one-and-done guys because they got them through the portal. I think Lane Kiffin is a good enough coach and has gotten Ole Miss to the point now where, by the way, I feel the same way about Tennessee and Josh Heupel, that I don't think Ole Miss is really in danger of falling off of a cliff here. In other words, I don't think you look at Ole Miss and you go, well, they lost all those players from last year. They're going 3-9. I just don't think Lane Kiffin is going to allow that to happen. I think they're going to be a competitive team, and I think they're going to win some games like they did last year. I do not think they're going to be as good, particularly early in the season, though, as they were last year. And even though this game is on the road at Ole Miss, I'm going to give LSU the benefit of the doubt here. This is the game that was the hardest for me to decide on this schedule. I do think Ole Miss can win this game. I'm going with LSU to get the win on the road. I think this will be a great game. Nussmeier, great quarterback. Lane Kiffin seems to always have a really good offense. This could be a high-scoring game here, an entertaining game. I'm going to give Ole Miss the win on the road, but this is a tricky game here I'm going to give LSU the win on the road against Ole Miss. But, boy, this is a tricky game here for Brian Kelly and LSU. Then they get a much-needed bye week. This is a tough start to the schedule for LSU here. That 3 competitive teams here in Clemson, Florida, and Ole Miss. I've got them 4-1 to start the season heading into that bye week. Then the South Carolina game. Now, this was a great game last year in Columbia, a game that South Carolina probably should have won. It was a terrible officiating call there at the end. But of course, none of that matters. LSU got the win. That's all that matters. And this is a home game, very important. Much like with the opposite of the Clemson game here, right? South Carolina can be a very difficult place to play, especially when the fans are into the game. And LSU found that out last year. Getting South Carolina off a bye week and at home, I think, is massive. I think LSU gets the win here over South Carolina, beats them for the second year in a row, still just with one loss. Then on the road at Vandy. Vandy was a good story last year. They weren't a great team. Now, Diego Poverty is back at quarterback, and he's got plenty to say this offseason about Vanderbilt winning the SEC and making the playoffs, which is just, of course, completely ridiculous. And they're not beating LSU. Yeah, it's on the road. I mean, this is a 19,000-seat stadium or whatever it is. LSU will get the win on the road at Vandy. Here's the second most difficult game for me to pick on LSU's schedule this year, Texas A&M. I don't know why nobody talks about Texas A&M, or I don't know why they don't talk about them more. And I'm pointing the finger at myself too, by the way. First-year head coach Mike Elko last year had them one game away from the SEC championship. Everybody was so focused on the Texas A&M Texas game last year being the rekindling of that rivalry, and we haven't seen this game in so long. We're so glad this game is back. Sort of lost in the weeds in that is, if Texas A&M had won that game, and this was the last game of the regular season, if Texas A&M had won that game, they would have been in the SEC championship. That's how close they were last year, year one under Mike Elko, to making the SEC championship game. Now, of course, they didn't beat Texas, and they didn't make the SEC championship. But Mike Elko has proven himself to be a good coach. You look what he did at Duke, beating Clemson over there, getting them to 8-9 wins, whatever it was. And even last year at Texas A&M, I thought had a pretty good year. They had the early loss to Notre Dame, and then the loss at the end of the year to Texas, which sort of eliminated from any sort of playoff type talk or whatever. But it was a pretty good team, and they got a quarterback back again this year that could have a big year. You do get them at home, though, and for me, that was the deciding factor. I'm going with LSU here. But again, just like with the Ole Miss game, this is a very tricky game. So I've got you beating Ole Miss and Texas A&M. You could lose one of those for sure, but benefit of the doubt, I'm giving you a win in both. Then you have your second bye week of the year, and then you head into the home stretch here in November with 4 straight games, 2 on the road and 2 at home. On the road at Alabama, not only did LSU lose to Alabama last year, and Kalen DeBoer's first year, the game was not competitive, just absolutely destroyed, 41-13 or 42-13. It was just an absolute beatdown, and that was in LSU. This is on the road in Bryant-Denny. It could be a much closer game this year, and LSU's got the talent to compete and beat an Alabama. I can't pick them to do it on the road, though. I got to give the win here to Alabama. I think LSU catches their second loss, but their first SEC loss, which, of course, is important when it comes to who makes the SEC championship game. It's not the number of losses you have that matters. It's the number of conference losses you have that matters. Clemson, a non-conference loss at the beginning of the year, now on the road at Bama. The second loss for the Corn Dog. Home against Arkansas. I like Sam Pittman. I think everybody likes Sam Pittman. I'm not high on that quarterback. Some people think, he's set to have some sort of big year. I don't really see it. And even if he does, there's just not enough around him to really make a difference, especially in a game like this. Again, a home game for LSU here. I think they rebound after a loss to Bama and get the win against Arkansas. Western Kentucky, obviously a win there. And then here's the problem on the road at Oklahoma. And again, I've done an Oklahoma version of this video. If you want more of my thoughts on this game in particular, check out my Oklahoma prediction video that I've done. This is going to be a massive game for LSU and Brian Kelly. They're going to be sitting on one SEC loss. A win here on the road at Oklahoma would almost guarantee LSU a spot in the SEC championship game. Now, it's possible it comes down to weird tiebreakers or something. But if they finish the season with one SEC loss, they're most likely going to be in the SEC championship game. They will definitely be in the playoffs. If they win this Oklahoma game, they'd be 10-2 with a loss to Clemson and Bama, 2 teams that are probably going to the playoffs. LSU would be in the playoffs. If they lose this game to Oklahoma, they're probably not going to the SEC championship game, which means they don't have an opportunity to guarantee themselves a playoff spot by winning the conference. And it would be their third loss, which we saw last year was enough to knock a lot of teams out of that 12-team playoff. I view this LSU game on the road at Oklahoma as almost a mini playoff game or play-in game. In other words, if LSU wins this game, They're probably in the playoffs, whether they make the SEC championship game or not with the one loss. If they lose this game on the road at Oklahoma, they're probably not going to the playoffs. Massive, massive game. And because of that, I'm going with Oklahoma. I cannot trust Brian Kelly in a game of this magnitude at the end of the year if it plays out this way, where literally everything is on the line. A trip to the SEC title game, a trip to the playoffs. I can't trust Brian Kelly there. Oklahoma was not a great team last year, but I do think they're going to be a lot better this year. They bring in John Mateer and a new offensive coordinator. They were one of the most injured teams in the country last year, not just the SEC. They're going to be a lot better. I really like that running back they picked up out of the portal from, I think, Cal, Jay Knott. Anyway, they're going to be a lot better than they were last year. Now, LSU could win this game for sure. If this game was played earlier in the year or there wasn't as much on the line, it would be easier for me to take LSU in this game. But again, it comes down to me, the 15-year history of Brian Kelly. And again, I've been as kind as I can. The guy wins a ton of games. But when it matters most, where are the Brian Kelly wins? They're hard to find. And I think this game is going to have a ton of meaning for LSU. It's on the road. I've got LSU losing their final game of the regular season on the road at Oklahoma, knocking them out of the SEC championship game and most likely knocking them out of the playoffs. I've got LSU going 9-3 in 2025. Losses at the beginning of the season to Clemson, the end of the season to Oklahoma, both road games, and an early November loss on the road at Bama. So 3 losses for LSU, all on the road. All the pretty good teams, Clemson and Alabama in particular. Oklahoma maybe improved, but maybe not a great team. But anyway, I've got LSU at 9-3. Let me know what you think down below. Be sure and let me know how stupid you think I am. And have a good morning.